So if you've watched this channel for a while, you know that I'm passionate about working remotely. But have you ever actually gone through and figured out how much working remotely actually saves you and what the equivalent would be in terms of like a pay raise by working remotely compared to working in an office? I actually built a calculator that allows you to figure this out yourself. With this calculator, you can actually figure out how much money you save by working remotely versus commuting to an office based on your specific numbers. In this video, I'm going to show you an example of how to use this calculator and how it would work for, say, the average American. And then, of course, I'll have a link in the YouTube video description if you want to try out the calculator yourself. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is how many days do you spend in the office? This is a fairly easy one. I think most people who have been trying to work remotely are trying to figure out how can I get a full-time remote job, not just hybrid. So if you are working a full-time job, you're most likely working 5 days a week. So you can drag this slider here to 5 days a week. And then I'm just going to use that because that's what most people would do. You can also figure this if you worked part-time as well if you want. So now you have to figure out your round trip commute in terms of miles. So to be more precise here, essentially you are trying to figure out how many miles do you commute, whether you're driving or taking public transportation, from going to work and from leaving work to come home on a daily basis for your work days. So according to AI here and just general averages in the United States, the average is 12 to 15 miles one way commuting on a daily basis for full-time workers. So that would be 24 to 30 miles per day round trip. So you would factor that into the calculator. So it usually starts you at 30 just as a placeholder because that's pretty close to what the average would be. And then of course you can adjust this if you want. If yours is maybe a little bit less or a little bit more, it just depends on your situation. Obviously it's not uncommon for people to drive for an hour to and from work on a daily basis. Now the average in the US for people who are commuting in terms of time would be 27 minutes one way. So you're talking about an average of around 54 minutes per day for people who have to commute to and from work round trip. So we'll just use 54 as this example. Now we're talking lunch and coffee. So this is going to vary more than maybe some of the other numbers in terms of how much you spend, because some people meal prep, some people take their lunch, some people skip it altogether, some people buy coffee, some people don't. It really just depends on your situation. That's why I built the calculator, so you can figure out your specific situation and not just go by averages. So for this particular example, it says $15 to $30 or so on an average day if you're doing lunch and possibly coffee. A typical coffee is like $5 or $6 now. It's kind of ridiculous. And then lunch, of course, it's very hard these days to even go to a drive-through and spend less than $15. So you're talking $15 to $30. So for the sake of this example, we'll just say $20 by going kind of right down the middle of these estimates. So according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, we actually have a median. Again, I use median because if you use average, you're going to be factoring, the average being probably higher than it should be because you're talking about all these billionaires and stuff that live in the United States. So if you go by median, it should be a little bit more accurate. So you're looking at approximately $61,000 to $63,500 according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we'll just say 63,000 because that's about right in that range. Now you might be wondering, okay, what does this option here mean? Factor the monetary value of reclaimed time into my verdict. So this is basically saying your time based on what you make is worth this much per hour. And so if you want to factor that in terms of how much money you are actually getting back in terms of the value of your time, you can factor that in. If you want to see a number that doesn't factor in how valuable your time is, you can uncheck this box right here if you want, and then just click calculate my verdict. So if you don't look at the monetary value of people's time that they're saving, the average American should be saving about $10,426 per year, which is the equivalent of a $5.01 per hour pay raise. Now, if you were to look at commuting expenses, you're saving about $5,200 a year. food and social costs, probably about $5,200 a year. But if you factor in monetary value of time, you're talking about $7,000, almost $7,100 a year. And then you've also reclaimed 9.8 days of personal lifetime every single year. So you're literally getting back like a 10-day vacation worth of time on a yearly basis. Now, if you factor in the monetary value of your reclaimed time, the value that you get per hour, now you are actually saving the equivalent of $17,514 a year if you are just like the average American and you go by the numbers of this example. And then that would be the equivalent of an $8.42 per hour pay raise. And this actually costs your employer nothing because they are actually just making a policy shift to remote work rather than paying you a raise of $8.42 an hour to get that equivalent. Now, there are also a lot of things that are not being factored in here that I mentioned in the article below the calculator. So for instance, vehicle wear and tear is not factored into this because that's kind of hard to calculate. It's going to make this kind of over detailed. And if you make these calculators too detailed, people just don't want to do all the research and figure out exactly how much that would actually be. You're also talking about public transportation costs, which can also be factored in as well. Child care and pet care. I've known people that have done both where they have a daycare fee that they're having to pay thousands of dollars a month for having their dog or their kids in daycare. Home electricity and utility use can actually increase a little bit if you're working from home, but it's probably not going to be by much. Home office equipment can sometimes cost you a little bit more if your company makes you pay for it yourself, but also many companies do provide a stipend or some sort of allowance for your home office. Tax deductions for your home office use can actually be very beneficial to you as well if you can write off a percentage of your home as an office. If you care about the environment and you are a believer in climate change, you can positively impact the environment by personally choosing to work remotely, although obviously it's not always a choice and you have to find the right company that'll hire you. But less people would be driving, less people would be using public transportation, and therefore there would be less emissions per person. It can also benefit companies as well. It can save them quite a bit of money when it comes to not having to have as much office space, which a lot of times costs them thousands and thousands of dollars per month. They don't have to provide as much equipment and things like that. Also the electricity, the plumbing, you have to provide bathrooms, you have to do so many different things. Oh, by the way, a lot of times you don't have as strict of a dress code when you work from home. If you look at remote companies, a lot of times they have a very casual dress code. So a lot of times you can save money from clothing costs as well. Obviously, a lot of that stuff would really complicate the calculator and nobody would want to go through every single one of those things. So I decided to keep the calculator fairly simple so that it mostly focuses on the biggest numbers, the ones that are easiest to calculate, and gets you a result fairly quickly. If you're interested in seeing how much a commute could be costing you on a regular basis, just as a fun experiment or as maybe a reason to give yourself to apply for more remote jobs, you can use the calculator by going to my website and going to remote jobs and then remote work calculators, or you can just go to a direct link in the YouTube video description that I'll have there for you. Feel free to share your results in the comments and let me know what you think about the calculator.